The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Great to have you in on a Wednesday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency for all your equipment financing needs. Go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. I don't know where he's been hiding, but he is back in studio. Good to see him. Great to have you in today. 489-1240, 489-1240, the numbers to dial up. Get in touch or get involved. You can also find us on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. We stream every day, every show, and your chance to interact that way. Also, the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. Give us a follow at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbel, and for Connor Clark at C_Clark_27. Officially, 80 days till college football. The countdown continues to tick. Are you guys ready to hear about some anonymous coaching takes on the Big Ten? That is Nebraska and every member school. Brett McMurphy doing the old AAU shuffle with what teams could academically be appeasing to the Big Ten, yet in the same breath, it's not a mandatory thing. It's my best Dean Wormer, a bad Dean Wormer. You don't have to have AAU to get into the Big Ten. Nebraska had it and then didn't in 2010. So we can get there and talk a little expansion. Mike Babcock will be with us. We will get his lowdown on the Wrestling Hall of Famer, the Iron Sheik, passing away. And yes, some Nebraska football thoughts. In hour two, Evan Bland will join us, more on Nebraska baseball and Husker football recruiting. Carter Nelson, his June is busy with camp tours and official visits. Just spent time in Georgia. Got the quote tweet from Dylan Raiola to come on with us to Georgia. He is in, I think it's Notre Dame this weekend, then Penn State, and then the grand finale in Lincoln, that 23rd through the 25th window for Nebraska to have the last pitch, potentially, if Carter Nelson wants to end his recruitment. So we'll cover all of that. We'll have a Jock Doc on Aaron Judge to end things. Fellas, I'm out at the ballpark. It's a sultry low to mid-90s right now. Dan Hartog, where we're calling home for me on the road, as Junior and his little buddies are out all dressed in green, as the Southwest JV team again taking on an inner city opponent. This is Southeast as they're warming up on the third base side of things. But Hartog, a gorgeous facility, all field turf, outfield, infield. It's a glorious thing. It adds probably about 30 degrees to the BO stench of Junior's car ride home. So that is what I'm looking forward to. He'll ride with his mother, quite honestly. But Elijah, what do you know? Connor, how are you doing?
Well, it's NBA Finals Game 3 tonight, so I have been excited all day. I woke up excited. I drank an extra cup of coffee to make sure I was raring to go. It's a good day. We got plenty to talk about today. Well, I mean, we just had breaking news in that tomorrow the Big Ten is going to be announcing their system moving forward, just like the SEC did a couple of days ago. So we're going to have that news tomorrow. Got plenty to get into today. The Nuggets play tonight. I know a lot of times during June, it's a bit of a dead season for talking about Nebraska and Husker football with no sports being in session, especially if baseball doesn't make a postseason run. But lo and behold, there's always news to talk about in Husker Nation, and it's no different today. I'm looking forward to it.
So is tomorrow's reveal going to be welcome to the party, Hollywood? Welcome to the party, UCLA, USC. Are they going to get just smoked with the kind of the old fraternity hazing style of schedule making? Hey, you took our money. Have fun traveling cross country every other week.
They're not going to be allowed to play a home game.
That's right. We'll send you to Penn State one week, then we'll send you back to Rutgers the next week. And then, hey, how does Maryland sound in the fall? But Connor, what have you been up to?
Well, I just got back from Texas, so that's where I've been hiding. But just like Elijah said, I'm excited for Game 3 of the NBA Finals tonight. Miami made it super interesting to take Game 2 on the road, so I'm excited for that. Obviously, we keep trucking along with Husker football in 80 days. I mean, that sounds far away, but it won't be once you blink your eyes a couple of times. So exciting stuff here, and good weather outside too, so I'm not complaining about that.
Really fast, your guys' chat on USC and UCLA just reminded me of something that I'd buried deep within me that I kind of forgotten about. We're going to have to track how many holding calls opponents of USC and UCLA get over their first couple years in the Big Ten. Remember that was a big thing for Nebraska? Like, Nebraska went, what was it? It was some stupid stat, like 17 straight conference games where the opponents didn't get a holding call called on them. Somebody's going to have to fact check me on that, but it was some absurd number of games. And then finally Nebraska, one of their opponents got a holding call called on them, and Husker Nation rejoiced, and we kind of buried that behind us. We're going to see if that's a real thing. Maybe the refs are out to get the new teams into the Big Ten. We'll have to track some officiating stats for both USC and UCLA as they make their foray into the Big Ten next season.
Well, there's a very real feel about Nebraska still to this day being unfairly treated by the league because Nebraska post-Riley shot their mouth off at the league. You go back to the 2020 season where Nebraska got hammered nationally about wanting to leave the league. Nebraska never said that, but they wanted to explore options about playing. Ohio State did the same thing. Michigan was in line there, but there was no spanking given to Ohio State or Michigan. But every year, chalk it up. Nebraska's first conference game will be on the road. Nebraska's been able to get hotel rooms in Champaign. It feels like every 3 years for a Friday night. And you have had some interesting crossovers, but you wanted those as you joined the league. You wanted to see Nebraska face off against Penn State. You wanted to face off against the Michigans and Ohio States because you could, for a while anyway, compete with them. They ended up in blowouts aside from the 2011 game, make that the 2012 game, but it was no, 2011. 2012 was bad. But you get what I'm saying. I mean, Nebraska's had not an easy time of it. And when they got into the league, they weren't fully vested. So they were getting partial paycheck versus when you look at Maryland and Rutgers joining the league, they got the full paycheck. So it's been an interesting dance for Nebraska, which leads us into this Athlon series as they come out and unveil their college football yearbook. The Hail Varsity yearbook is going to be in your hot little mailbox or newsstand shortly. HailVarsity.com/offer. Get your subscription to the magazine. This will not include the yearbook, or the digital is included though. So make that happen. But guys, I love when coaches talk honestly and openly, albeit anonymously, about other teams. And they go down the list, starting with Northwestern, getting into Minnesota, and then they hone in and hit on Nebraska. We'll start with Nebraska, and the consensus is this. They think there's a lot of talent, they being the coaches that have spoken about the Big Red. They believe there's a lot of talent. They really think Matt Rhule, quote here, is a legitimately good college coach. They have a talented offense. The question mark, guys, is will it click in year one? They've got a very difficult defense to prepare for. Will it click year one? And I think yes is the answer on both. I think the offense will click. I think the defense will click. There'll be one side of the ball stronger, in my opinion, but I think it'll be more of a complimentary football season for Nebraska football, which is what they have to have, and you factor in special teams. I just don't know when that will be, and will they click at the same point? Will the offense start off a strength, kind of in tune, or will it be a gradual process where by week 6, week 7, you're gelling and finding your way. And I think that's how it can be for both sides of the football for Nebraska. I just don't know when. I think by season's end, you'll see the team get better. I think by season's end, the team will be able to find their way to a bowl game. I just don't know how soon that'll happen. The other part of this in the anonymous thoughts on Nebraska with the Big Ten coaches with Athlon Sports is Nebraska's NIL factor, how it is very real, what they're building with NIL, what they're doing in recruiting. If they get some of those foundational pieces, they say, they being multiple coaches, say this: Nebraska is a sleeping giant that will wake up. Matt Rhule's talked about waking the giant up. And that is really cool to hear if you're a Nebraska football fan, but you've also heard it for years that, Nebraska's on the verge of breaking through or coming back or being back. And I have a better feel about it just blindly because of Matt Rhule's track record. But reaction here. I'd like to start with you, Connor, your thoughts as well on just what the scoop is on the Big Red by the Anonymous Coaches Association.
Well, I don't want to call it fear, but it's the teams, they feel cautious about Matt Rhule because what was the quote last year that we talked about a lot? Nebraska, same story, the Anonymous Coaches poll. Nebraska's the all-bus team. They come off the bus looking like
at least they moved away from the all-off-the-bus team, though, this year.
Read in between the lines from what Anonymous Big Ten coaches think is Nebraska's the all-bus team, but they're going to find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. They're going to find a way to beat themselves. They're essentially, reading between the lines on that quote, they're not a well-coached team. Something's going to go wrong for them, and they're going to become a head case. Now, whenever you combine those two quotes, Nebraska was the all-bus team. Now they have a real, legitimate head coach at the helm. Read in between the lines there on what you think anonymous Big Ten coaches think about Nebraska under Matt Rhule. They had the team that looked the part. Now they have a coach who talks the talk and walks the walk. He's a good football coach. He's shown that everywhere he's been. Let's see what he can do. Like, they're not going to make any bold predictions about Nebraska, but if you read in between the lines there, which I like doing, that sounds like a coach who is saying, yeah, they got the talent. At least they've had the talent in the past couple of years. Now they got the head coach. We'll see what they can do with it, but Nebraska's going to be someone to watch out for.
Well, I think I agree mostly with what the coaches had to say. I mean, obviously they can't get it too much into it because they don't know as much as obviously the people on the inside. So, I mean, I agree with everything that they had to say. As far as, you want to talk about different sides of the ball clicking early, I don't know if I would go. I would say the offense is probably more of a gradual click because I honestly have a hard time seeing that clicking right away at Minnesota, prime time on a Thursday. I mean, that's just a tough situation to have your offense be like, all right, boom, everybody gets it, let's go and run over everybody in the Big Ten. That's just not how it works in a league like this, and especially in that type of situation, right? So I think that's more of a unit that would click probably towards, I would like to say, the game before Michigan, I would like to think, in your last non-con game. So that's my thoughts as far as that. But, I mean, again, with the coaches' comments, the anonymous coaches' comments, I would agree with that. And, I mean, it's nice to, hear, too, that other coaches are taking note about, okay, Matt Rhule's in Lincoln now, and we all thought that this was maybe something that was going to take off in the past handful of years in the Frost era. Well, maybe now there's a really legitimate chance that this could happen in the next, say, 2 to 3 years. And to hear other coaches say that, obviously as a fan and as somebody who covers the team, it's encouraging.
Rave reviews in for Rhule. That is pretty much up and down with the anonymous Big Ten coaches, how good Rhule is, how detailed he is, how good he is at development. I mean, all those things. And the financial infrastructure in place for future success. You have the track record of success. Coaches are big on past performance predicting future results. And Matt Rhule's past performances after that first year of getting your sea legs, they were a pain in the neck to deal with. They were even a pain in the neck to deal with during the 1 and 2 win seasons where they almost pulled some major upsets. But the respectable product is something they very much believe will be on the turf at Memorial Stadium this fall. and multiple folks saying sleeping giant. Yeah, that's Nebraska. If that happens sooner rather than later, that's big. That's why you spend the money. That's why you make the hire. That's why you build the building. And that's why you go Junction Boys and you go Old Dorm. you go to Selleck like they're doing. I got a phone call from Warren, friend out in western Nebraska, and he graduated in the mid-'60s from Nebraska. And his dorm, or he had a buddy that was in a dorm, that's where Solich and the crew would go. And Warren we were talking earlier today, and he was like, you're face-to-face, you're physically conversating with your teammates, you're getting to know people. I mean, that's really big. It was big back then during the Solich era, but it's big now, guys, in the era of, if I want a response from my kid, I need to text him versus the eye contact part. So getting everybody huddled up in one spot will reinforce that brotherhood mentality. And you're, again, going through the suck all together in the dorms versus your plush apartment via NIL.
Mm-hmm. You can walk down the hall, get some team building, go play some Madden with your buddy, go watch some baseball with your buddy. Like, it's a cool idea. It's.
I just wonder if it's just the one TV in the center area. I'm kidding. We'll check in with Mike Babcock, get his thoughts on the Iron Sheik, Tommy Frazier to the Hall of Fame, Bill Walton, oh yeah, Husker football, Babbers on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. We welcome in historian, author, Hall of Famer Mike Babcock. Great work for a number of years covering Nebraska football, and incredible work this yearbook with Hail Varsity, and celebrating 100 years at Memorial Stadium. Mike, Pershing Auditorium in Lincoln, Civic in Omaha, well-renowned for its wrestling history, specifically Omaha, but a lot of steel cage matches, my man, in the 80s growing up between Hulk and the Giant and King Kong Bundy. I mean, you go down the list of some of the names. If you could put together a steel cage match at the center of Memorial Stadium, pick two wrestlers, alive or dead, and who would you have wanted to book?
Well, one of my favorites was Dick the Bruiser, so I'd probably put Dick the Bruiser in there somewhere. And I might put him against Vern Gagne.
Okay.
Kind of a funny story. I posted a picture the other day of a card, promoting a wrestling match. The main event was Vern Gagne, and here I've got it here: Vern Gagne and Haru Sasaki. But one of the early the opening match was the Mad Russian was in that, and someone texted me and said that the Mad Russian was actually named Eric Pomeroy. And when he retired from wrestling, he lived out his life in his wife in Stromsburg, Nebraska.
Did they? Okay.
So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. When I was getting off the track here, but I used to watch, Vern Gagne, Jack Pesek, and the villain here was Baron Otto von Krupp from Munich, Germany.
The Baron. Yeah,
the Baron. And when my family moved to California and I was out there for 2.5 years at Chico State, Otto von Krupp was out there wrestling, and he was the Mad Russian at that point. Again, another Mad Russian, because I think he decided that there was less, at that time with the Cold War, there was more animosity towards Russia than there was Germany. So it was more advantageous for him to be a Russian, not the Mad Russian here, but a Russian out there, after he had been Baron Otto von Krupp here for years. So that's kind of the way professional wrestling was. But the Iron Sheik, he was an Iranian American. He was what he pretended to be in the wrestling ring.
So with the Iron Sheik, is he as good of a heel as there's been? And he teamed with Sergeant Slaughter. The guy wrestled, and his last match was 13, 14 years ago. He wrestled till he was 60, and he was built up. He had a little roadside issue with him and Hacksaw Jim Dugan that ruined and blew the cover of their in-ring hate towards one another. But no, the Sheik, man, that camel clutch he did on people, pretty iconic move.
Yeah. Well, you had the Baron von Raschke, who had the claw, former Omaha North and Husker. He was a Husker,
Really?
actually, Jim Raschke, but he wrestled as the Baron, had the claw. He was a bad guy. I guess the Undertaker was probably a bad guy at some point, wasn't he?
Yeah, I would bet money, yes.
So you had to, Scott Hall, and I forget who was his partner. They were bad guys. There were plenty of those. Even Hulk Hogan kind of flipped there for a time.
Him and Rodman. Mike Babcock's with us, Hail Varsity Radio.
The one guy who never flipped.
You're turning it off now. It's like, what are we talking about here? Wrestling?
Wrestling. The Iron Sheik passing away at the age of 81.
Well, to flip it to football, we can go, one of my favorite football movies of all time, go to Captain Insano. You don't know of Captain Insano? He's ready to open a can of whoop ass. He shows no mercy. The water boy? No one?
Oh, yeah, okay. Fred the Donkey also starred in that with Kathy Bates.
Yes. Great movie. Great movie. I'll put him, not being a guy who's a big wrestling fan, I think Captain Insano is my favorite of all time.
Mike, I want to get your thoughts on the term sleeping giant. That has a little wrestling background after Andre took down 60 Coors in a sitting. But on the football field, what do you think of or think about with all these anonymous Big Ten coaches, many of them saying, look, Nebraska is a sleeping giant under Rhule because they think he'll get it flipped around?
Well, I thought of two anecdotes. Again, here I'm telling more stories, but, one of them is that, when Bob Devaney came here in 1962, there was that attitude, and I think Bob even acknowledged it. He said, hey, the talent is here. We can get the job done. And he turned it around in 1 year, 9-2 the first year. We got to a bowl game, the Gotham Bowl, drew 6,600 people reportedly. And Bob said if there were 6,600 people there at the game, a lot of them came as, posters.
Empty seats.
Filling up empty seats. But Bill Jennings was the previous coach and had a reputation for being a good recruiter. And the number of talented players that were here when Bob came here were such that, again, he was able to get the job done. Now, in this day and age, I'm not sure that you're going to turn it around in 1 year. Maybe there is the talent there for Matt Rhule to get the job done. But, Elijah had a good summation of what Matt Rhule is. I think that his approach, if his players buy into it, how quickly they can, I think that speaks well for Nebraska's potential. But I don't know what's going to happen. I think that it's going to be a bowl eligible team, but I don't know. It reminds me of when I lived in Illinois and I was covering a high school there. He was a legendary coach at Champaign Central, Tommy Stewart. And he was kind of a gruff guy, but I always would do my follow-up story on Friday night's game on Saturday. He did his team's laundry, and I'd meet him at the laundromat, and we'd chat, and I'd help him do the laundry. But before the games, I would always ask him, what do you think? What's going to happen here? How do you feel about the game going into it? And he always said, ask me that question on Saturday, and then you'll know and I'll know. And that's kind of the way I look at this situation right now with Nebraska. Ask me at the end of the season, and then I'll know and you'll know whether this thing gets turned around. The pieces are there, I think, but how quickly can you turn something around in this day and age? And when we talk about turnaround, are we talking about competing for a national title, or are we talking about consistently being competitive in the Big Ten, having a chance to be in that Big Ten championship game and succeed? I think that's probably where you're looking, not so much that national championship thing, because I think that right now that's difficult to get in that mix.
Mike, with the division system presumably going away next year, we'll have a little bit more clarity tomorrow whenever Tony Petitti's on BTN to tell us what the plans are moving forward. But with that presumably going away, Nebraska is going to be in a situation different than the Big Ten West starting in 2024. How important is it that Nebraska at least make some incremental progress next season? That's a buzzword used by Trev Alberts. To make some incremental progress next season, to at least give them some momentum heading into a new, what are we going to call it, a wild west of the Big Ten moving forward that we don't know quite what it's going to look like.
Yeah, that's I think that's a good point. I think Nebraska does have to build some momentum going into that. Get some confidence among the players and see some evidence that, yes, they do have the right coach here. They do have someone that can get the job done. And here's evidence of it, you've got to be competitive in the Big Ten this upcoming season, I think. And you're in a position where you can be, because you've got some games that I think are winnable. But we're going to see how that goes. I think it's important, the momentum, because it's strange. Conferences, what's going to happen with conferences in the immediate future? With all the expansion, and how are you going to break down the conference schedule? And it's to me it's mind-boggling to think what's going to happen when I started in this business when it was the Big Eight. There were 8 schools, and you played them all every year, and you had some idea what you were going to face that year. But it's all Wild West. That's right.
Mike, about a minute here, but to you, what is competing in the Big Ten, whether that's record-wise or whatever you want to call it, but what is competing in the Big Ten? What does that look like for Nebraska this season?
I think immediately it looks like being competitive enough to put your overall record at bowl eligibility, whether that's 6-6 or 7-5, and that requires to have some success against Big Ten foes. And, I think that, again, I think Nebraska, the division right now, I think Nebraska in a position where it can be competitive in that division. Whether the conference overall, I'm not saying that, but I think Nebraska has a chance to be competitive within the division this year, enough so to be bowl eligible.
I don't know that there's a ton of separation with some of those schools that have finished above Nebraska traditionally in the Big Ten West. You just beat the team that was supposed to be in Indy last year, despite your record being a 3-win team going into Iowa City. So you've shown that. You've also shown the ability to drop some games against teams that you've, on paper, out-recruited. We're not even talking about the Wisconsins of the world who've been your West favorite more times than not. It's been a challenge to get by Illinois and Minnesota. Mike will pick this up next week and get caught up again. Thanks for a few minutes with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys, as always.
Appreciate it. There he is. I love that. We need a slow-mo of Mike doing the claw as it zooms in on the screen. Mike Babcock with us, historian, author, and a Hall of Famer with Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com. What are some thoughts on the other teams that Nebraska needs to take down to find their way to bowl eligibility? The anonymous coaches talk continues. Hail Varsity presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Mike Babcock as he joined us last segment. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play can get the podcast. You want to catch up with Mike Babcock, or the entire show can do it. Evan Bland in about 20 minutes. So, Elijah, you just sent me a really cool screenshot of a Lincoln Prep player that is off to Boulder. And this is not football related, but Hurrdat Dak is a Buffalo. He's going to go play for CU in the Pac-12. Good for him, man.
And this comes after, I believe it was a couple of months ago, he announced that he was reclassifying and going off to prep school for a year. And now that he's got an offer at Colorado, I don't quite know if this is now, if this is later, if he's still going to go off and do that season of prep schooling, which was his initial plan. But now the recruitment is heating up a little bit. Colorado is going to be the next stop for him. I don't know if whether he's going to be at Colorado come this fall, or if he's still planning on doing that year. But eventually, Hurrdat Dak is going to be a Buffalo, so he stays in the black and gold, which is, I guess, cooler than if a Lincoln kid was going off to play Colorado for football. That would be a bigger deal. I think that'd be a bit more of a punch in the gut for some Husker fans with everything going on with Coach Prime. But I think you can sit back and say good for Hurrdat. We've watched him play, all three of us, Connor, you, and myself, Schmitty. We've all watched Hurrdat Dak play.
Southeast.
We all see the talent. We all see the athleticism. I think he's a bit of a raw prospect. Needs to get some maturity on the basketball court down. I think needs to find a role that suits him and settle into that role, as opposed to being the guy who's kind of got to, I don't want to say do it all for Lincoln Southeast, but at times it felt like he was trying to do a little bit too much. But gifted passer from that high post. I think he's going to fit into a college system well. Colorado's been on the trend upwards in terms of basketball. I think it's a great landing spot for him. So I'm really excited for what Hurrdat can do over for the Buffs.
Was checking in with our basketball brain. That's Jeff Smith. And sounds like that you had just a really, really good past few weeks for Hurrdat on the AAU circuit. I mean, really wowed. Had some really good stacked weeks with the AAU performances. We're big Braden Frager fans as well. He's a kid that's at Southwest and super talented, and he continues to get offers, not only Nebraska and Creighton, but dare I call them your Northwestern Wildcats, Connor Clark, as Northwestern offering Frager not long ago. Guys, we've spent a lot of time on the anonymous coaches, and you look at the rundown on the Big Ten, questions that you can just kind of save and then paste and post from year to year. The number keeps growing for Michigan. Do they get a third straight versus a second straight Big Ten championship? And do they make it a third straight playoff appearance? And do they get over that hill and win a title? James Franklin has that window closed. It's not that he's out-talented. He's got dudes on both sides of the football. He's got a five-star quarterback. That's, no matter how talented they are, that's really iffy to give them the keys and expect great consistency in a year one. But they got a dude at running back, and they got a great back seven, and traditionally good on the lines of scrimmage, Penn State. But, does it come together for Penn State? What does Ohio State do? And then there's the teams Nebraska needs to start beating. And that's all of the West, because they have had issues in the West. They beat Iowa last year for the first time in 7 years. But you look at kind of that middle group. There's Wisconsin, there's Iowa, and then there's Minnesota. There's that triangle. Usually one of them steps back, or they stalemate at a 9-3, 9-4. But those three will beat up on one another. It's very rare that you'll have a clean sweep by a Wisconsin over an Iowa and over a Minnesota, and vice versa. Minnesota will usually split with a Wisconsin or an Iowa. And then Nebraska needs to find their way into, worst case, going 2-2 or 2-1 against those three. You can add Illinois into it, but the word on Minnesota, that's Nebraska's opener. That is your kickoff to the Big Ten, and it's a chance to go 1-0 in your division while it still exists. And the lowdown on Minnesota this year by a lot of the Big Ten coaches, size-wise and physicality-wise, they're as big as these coaches put it, as the best teams in the Big Ten. Their size is comparable to what Ohio State and what Michigan has. Their difference is the athleticism. They're going to be replacing 7 7 starters on defense. Minnesota will be. And then Makis, the quarterback, and I butchered the hell out of that. Forgive me. Callie McManus, thank you.
You butchered it again, but we'll let it slide.
Can we come up with a nickname for this guy?
Callie?
Oh,
We'll just call him
he had
Callie.
a nickname in when he was up at Antioch, and I can't remember. He's Greek.
You know it, but you just can't say it.
I legitimately, I'd have to go back in the Twitter archives for that one.
Callie came in and beat Nebraska with some deep throws, but he's not awful. They went to him over Morgan. They got to replace Mo Ibrahim at running back, and they're just not sure about their quarterback situation. So all that being said, PJ Fleck will probably find an answer for at least 7 wins. Are you buying that?
I mean, I would 7. I would.
Yeah, so would I.
I think they're probably 8-9 win football team this year. I don't know. Would you agree?
Well, that kind of feels like PJ Fleck's, I don't want to call it the floor based on what we've seen, but we know he's going to have a well-coached team, a tough football team that's going to be in just about every single game that they play in. So whenever you hear that, and I mean, what I've seen from Minnesota in the past couple years, what we saw from Callie McManus at the end of last season, 8 wins seems like a reasonable expectation to have for this Minnesota team. Are they going to go win the Big Ten West? I don't know about that. Are they going to be in contention come November to go win the Big Ten West based on how they play, based on that final closing stretch of their season? Most likely. I'd be a lot more surprised if this is a 6-win team than if they were a 9-win team. Like I'd venture to say, based on what I know about PJ Fleck and how he builds his teams, it's a team that isn't going to beat themselves all that much. They're going to play like a pretty classic Big Ten West football team where they're going to ground and pound you a little bit. With Callie McManus, they're going to get him involved in the rushing attack a little bit. It might come down to how well their defense plays this season, but I still think 8 wins should be not only the expectation for PJ Fleck this year, but just PJ Fleck moving forward. That's what kind of team and what type of roster he's built at Minnesota. I think just about every single year you can pencil in Minnesota for 8 wins.
It's more than doable.
It's doable, but Wisconsin's been down. They've beaten Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin rises up. Just because they're going air raid doesn't mean that Fickell's going to abandon what they have in Braylon Allen. So Wisconsin and Iowa are kind of your co-favorites. Culture's the last man standing at Iowa. The word on them is they need a scheme change, but their offensive line returns. They've got a stud running back that is ready to break out, Caleb Johnson, and their defense won't be 9 points a game elite, that it'll probably be pretty hard to get 20 on them, although Nebraska did that last year. So Iowa's got a lot of do or die going here with the family dynamic and a new AD coming in. They pencil Illinois as a team that's likely to take a step back closer to 500. And that's based on all the draft picks they lost. They were pretty elite in their back end with the corners and safeties. Their linebacking core was really good as well.
But Brett Bielema, every single year, builds a hard-nosed football team that's tough to beat.
They're young this year, though, but he's going to go with some of the young people because he's not a portal guy. We'll wind down hour 1 at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you one final time this hour. It's Hail Varsity Radio. Evan Bland coming up here next hour. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Cotter Clark, Hail Varsity Radio, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play for the podcast, and can get the video Hail Varsity YouTube channel. So we're going to deem, we don't give nicknames to a lot of our writers via email or callers or folks in the stream. But Todd's an emailer. We appreciate Todd listening. We're going to call him Pissed Off Todd. Because every email, there's some sort of angst. And Todd, listen, bro, I don't know what to tell you as far as the coaching changes, mass coaching changes over the past 20 plus years, and how hope has been sold with the new guy each year. That's what it's been. And until they screw it up, you're just going to go along for the ride. And as we've covered the Riley era, as we covered the Bo era, as we covered the Callahan era, as we've covered the Solich era, and as we've also covered the Frost era, and now we get into the Matt Rhule era. Yeah, there are multiple coaches per athlon that call Nebraska a sleeping giant. Let me read Pissed Off Todd's email. Laugh my off. No way did more than one coach say the word sleeping giant. And it was probably the other terrible teams and coaches, whoever we beat last year. That makes zero difference going forward. All teams are very different year to year. Now I'm still sick of Kool-Aid from all I drank as a kid. The cherry. So, yeah, there's been a lot of Kool-Aid handed out. Unfortunately, some of it's been the Jim Jones Kool-Aid when it comes to results versus hype.
I feel like that's been a lot of it.
Yeah, and are we pouring the sugar into the Kool-Aid? I don't know, man. I'm reporting. We have a topic we're talking about. It's awesome to hear coaches, albeit anonymous, dish dirt. There's not a lot of dirt on Nebraska other than in year one, does it click? Does the offense click? And if it's not a great season or a good season in year one, that's also been a trend under Matt Rhule. Can it be better in year two, year three? Are you going to lose on bad coaching and decision-making to Northwestern? Probably not as often. Are you going to be able to make plays down in the fourth quarter in tight ball games? That's a mental health check Matt Rhule's trying to fix and figure out. Get them better physically, but get them equally as locked in mentally where there's not a fear of crap in the bed again. And that's his task in year one and beyond.
And whenever we talked with, it was on the Saturday morning show a couple weeks ago, Gary Sharp, he made up he brought up a point which I think is very true. We in the media learned a lot about how we do our jobs from that Scott Frost era. There was a lot of learning lessons to be taken from the media. We can admit that. There's been learning lessons from the fans as well. And if you're on the side of things, what you saw over the past couple of years makes you want to not drink the Kool-Aid and not have any hope. Fine by me. That is your choice. That is your option. But that's the thing with hiring new head coaches.
Be very cautious about getting hurt again.
That's the thing with new head coaches, though, and change. It's meant to bring hope. Nebraska football felt hopeless. Matt Rhule is supposed to bring in hope. That's his job. Part of his job is selling what the future can be. That is hope. Until we are proven otherwise, the changes he are making, we have to see them as positive until proven otherwise, proven that they're not. So if you don't want to buy into it, fully on you. That's your choice, but I'll leave it at that. We need to get to break.
Better track record, at least with a guy like Rhule. Hour two, Evan Bland on the way.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back into it. It's hour two. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Evan Bland with us from the Omaha World Herald at Evan Bland, OWH, where you follow him on Twitter. Evan, some surprising news to some, not to others, yesterday with Nebraska baseball and the parting of ways with Jeff Christy. We spent some time on it yesterday. I want to get your reaction to the move by Nebraska baseball.
Well, yeah, I was kind of on the fence about whether I thought they would make that decision or not. And it's interesting because, I think you can make the case that it's been going okay on the pitching side for Nebraska, where from an ERA perspective, they've been top three in the Big Ten every year that he's been here, the last three full seasons. They, in another, I think, important metric, strikeout to walk ratio, they've been right near the top. They don't typically walk batters at a pretty elite level. And so in that sense, Nebraska's been doing pretty well. But then I think you put that into context with, there just maybe haven't been as many examples of guys being developed on the mound as you'd be looking to have. There have been a couple. Emmett Olson last year was a good story, and they developed some relievers over the years too. But maybe just, I think it shows up in the midweek that there just hasn't been the depth of talent that you want there, where you can put a guy out on a Tuesday and expect him to go 5 innings and then turn it over to some other maybe not high leverage arms and be able to get the job done. And so that really bore out when you play 500 ball in the midweek and in the 6 losses that you have to teams like Creighton and South Dakota State and Omaha. You're giving up 42 runs in those 6 losses. I mean, that's just not going to cut it. And so I think that's probably, if you're making the case for why Nebraska's made the change, that's what it is. It's development. It's cultivating that depth that you need to not just make the tournament, but look around what just happened in regionals last weekend. When you get into that 3rd game, so few teams have the ability to put some trustworthy arms out there to get outs and to do what you need to do. And Nebraska has been they've been shy of that the last few years. I don't think there's any way around it. And so I think you're making that move to find somebody who can give you a greater depth of options out of the bullpen moving forward.
Evan Bland's with us here from the Omaha World Herald. It's Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, this feels like the type of move that shows that Will Bolt's feeling the pressure for next season in terms of his own job security going forward. It's a guy in Christy that he's been around for a long time. They're good friends off the field, and feels like one of those moves that you don't make unless you really feel like your job is on the line next season, right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with the notion that this was not an easy decision for him to make. I mean, they go back to Nebraska's 2005 run when Will Bolt was a volunteer assistant and Jeff Christy was the catcher. They've worked together at multiple places and multiple stops. Their families are close. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big decision and one I'm sure that was not made lightly. And, yeah, I mean, I think back to his final press conference after the Big Ten tournament semifinals last month. He had the look of a guy who was laser focused on getting this thing turned around. And he said, as the head coach, it's up to me to do whatever it needs to be done to get Nebraska back into postseason contention. And sure enough, we saw that play out the way that it did. Again, like it wasn't like the pitching was a gaping hole in what this team had done. But I think especially with what they had going into the season, you kind of felt like there actually would be some depth of talent. And by the end, they're leaning heavily on 2 fifth-year seniors, a walk-on sidearm throwing guy in Corbin Hawkins, who has since retired from baseball. And basically, you're trying to figure out your Sunday starting job every week. They would put Will Walsh out there if they didn't need him earlier in the weekend, and that's just not the path that you're looking for to winning a conference title, to being in contention for a regional. It just hasn't worked out that way. And so, yeah, I mean, you zoom out and you say, okay, it's been 2 years now since Nebraska took Arkansas to the brink in that regional final, and it's the longest postseason drought that Nebraska's had since they went into the Big Ten. And so I think that speaks to the expectations that this program does have, and certainly they have the resources, the fan base, everything that you could want, maybe with the exception of the weather, to field a contending team, and they feel like they can do better there. So yeah, I think there's definitely some pressure to get back to where they believe they can be relative to the resources and expectations they have.
Evan Bland joining us from the Omaha World Herald at Evan Bland OWH, where you follow him on Twitter. Evan, what's your read on Rob Childress? I know he had been mentioned for the Missouri opening that was filled. What's your gut tell you about him wanting to do this full time at his age? He's not old, but he's a happy grandpa. That's the other side of this coin.
Right, and that's the question, I think. I mean, he's in his mid-50s. When he took the role that he has now as director of player personnel, he did so, and he said this when he took the job, was to be closer to family. And you think about his career path from being the pitching coach at Nebraska, the assistant head coach there, and then he spends 12, 13 years as an SEC head coach at Texas A&M. At that point when you get let go, I think there was a desire to decompress a little bit and take a step back. And I think this role that he has been in as that director of player development, where you're helping guys off the field, I know he's got a big part in evaluating transfer portal candidates and people that they're looking at. When you're in that position, I think you have to really be honest with yourself and say, is this where you want to be? Do you like taking that step back, or are you ready to jump back into maybe more of an on-field, intense sort of role? And so, we'll see what he decides with that. He's certainly qualified, obviously put together some of the best staffs in Nebraska history and some really dominant Texas A&M rotations and bullpens as well. So I think if he's interested, obviously you have to give that a long look and go that direction. But if not, I think it would be fascinating too to see what that job would fetch in terms of interest on a national level, because again, Nebraska is going to give you the support that you need in the way that not a lot of schools outside the SEC or the ACC maybe will. And so, I think if you're going to go outside, you got to find somebody who can recruit, who can develop, and who has a specific vision in mind for how Nebraska pitchers will have success.
Evan, email that came in from listener Steve, loves baseball, loves our baseball segments. Where do you think Nebraska's recruiting footprint is, and where should it be for baseball? We talk about it all the time for football. Is it a much different answer for baseball? What's your thought?
Well, I know what it is. It's they start in state. They're going to look at Texas. They're going to hit the junior college ranks pretty hard, and they're going to look at some of the other connections they have. You notice that they have a connection into Canada with their former Nebraska player Adam Stern, who's the youth coach up there. So they have a pipeline that's brought in some players in that regard. So I think that's what it is. I know, the in-state conversation is interesting because you look at some of the talent that the state of Nebraska has put out this year and in recent years, and it's a lot of talent. And quite honestly, there's a lot of talent that's going elsewhere, to the SEC, to the Big 12, whatever it might be. And, if you're in Nebraska, it's a tough conversation because, the more you win, obviously, the more attractive you are to those type of prospects. But, it's just a tough spot to be in, because in this day and age of huddle and recruiting tapes and everybody sort of being scouted by everybody, it's harder. I mean, you have SEC schools coming into the state really consistently for the first time ever because of technology. It's not maybe the way that it was 20 years ago when Nebraska found, they unearthed some gems like Johnny Dorn and Java Chamberlain. I mean, you wonder how guys like that would have maybe been recruited in the modern era. So I think that's a challenge that they've had. But again, given this staff's connection to the state of Texas, Will Bold and Lance Harvell, and Rob Childress, too, quite frankly, I think it makes a lot of sense that you continue to pound that area moving forward, too.
Evan Blaine's with us here. And Evan, no right answer on this question, but whenever you look at the three major men's sports, football, basketball, and baseball, which of those sports do you think it's most important to lock up that 500-mile radius of in-state kids and kids in the surrounding communities?
I mean, you probably got to stick with football, and just because of the way that the local talent has exploded here, in the last 10 to 15 years, especially, where you're talking about now you're seeing, half a dozen or more Power 5 athletes coming out of this state every year. I mean, it just wasn't that way before, and you can point to a lot of reasons for why that might be, from just technology getting the word out to training methods and some of these academies that have popped up and allowed guys to develop. But I think especially in the current climate of college athletics, where you have the transfer portal and you're resetting your roster every year and you're trying to find an identity, I mean, the fact is the 500-mile radius is full of kids who are more likely to stay closer to home, who are more invested in the program, and who are, of the skill sets that Nebraska is going to need to have a sustainable future of success in terms of guys on the offensive line, in particular, linebacker type of bodies, that sort of thing. I think you have to start building there, and then you go outside, you go national, maybe for more of your skill players and supplement things from the portal. But I think if you don't have a foundation locally in football, you're really up against the wall in terms of trying to fill out the rest of your roster.
Evan Bland with us. Evan, let's keep with that in-state theme. Your story that just published a bit ago on Omaha.com. When it comes to Carter Nelson, he has had the recruiting whirlwind of the month of June. You just wrapped in Georgia. He's off to South Bend, then Happy Valley, and then the grand finale for the month in Lincoln with that priority recruiting weekend. I know you had a chance to talk with Carter's dad. What's your read on the situation here with Carter and his recruitment, because special ball player that's getting national attention?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to this month, essentially. I mean, you think about his recruiting process when he came onto the national scene a couple of years ago, when he jumped, that high jump that was among the best nationally, around 7 feet. And now he's got well over 30 offers, and the last, year or so has been about accumulating those offers, kind of getting a sense for what schools that he was interested in. And now this month is official visit month. Like you said, it was Georgia, it's Notre Dame, Penn State, and Nebraska. Those are the 4 official visits that he's looking to take right now. And the idea is if he is convinced of one of those schools being his home after that, then he'll make a decision and lock it in. If not, maybe he'll take another official visit and continue out the process a little bit. But this is the big chance. Like, these schools that have been recruiting Carter Nelson for a while, including Nebraska, get that one last crack in an official visit capacity where they can roll out the red carpet, pay all of his expenses, impress him, sell him on what they can do for his future, and then he makes a decision. And so he's right in the thick of that thing right now, and he's an explosive athlete, like we mentioned, with his ability in the high jump and in sprints. But I think he's also sold coaches on his ability to move inside and be an inline blocking tight end if he's needed in that capacity as well. So it's a really key month for him. I think if you get into early July and he hasn't made an offer or made a commitment, maybe mid-July, then you maybe start to wonder kind of what he's thinking. But I think if one of these schools wows him this month, there's a pretty good chance that his recruiting process could come to an end here before his senior season starts in August.
What's your read with his, lack of a better term, fandom? Did he grow up watching and liking Nebraska, being a Nebraska kid? Is it a close to home discussion, or is he a worldly guy that wouldn't mind leaving home?
Well, I think it's the mix. I think, he grew up in Ainsworth and rural Nebraska and loves the state. I know his parents are both Nebraska fans, and he's been to many games growing up. I think he likes this community locally, but I think he's also smart enough to look around and look at things a little more objectively, too, and say, where can I go that's going to give me the best shot to be in the NFL and to make money there and to have a football career. And so certainly, as you mentioned, Georgia has shown its ability at a high level to turn out tight ends, Penn State as well. I mean, quite honestly, Nebraska has not been too far off in terms of the tight ends that it's put out there. They have a pretty good track record of late sending players to the NFL at that position. So I think, there's sort of a balance there where is he most comfortable in terms of culture and just what region he's in and the coaching staff. But I also think, this is a guy who's a big Kansas City Chiefs fan, and he loves Travis Kelce, and that's the name that continues to come up in terms of what he sees maybe his ceiling being and maybe how he would be used over the long term. And, if a school doesn't show that it can maybe get him to that point, then I think you rule them out. So that's probably the bottom line is, who can use him in the way that he feels like he can be used, and maybe that ultimately ends in a career in professional football.
Evan Bland, Omaha World Herald. Give him a follow at Evan Bland, OWH. Evan, thanks for a few minutes today.
Thanks, guys.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
We're presented by Currency here at Dan Hartog Field, a scoreless battle going on between JV baseball, Southwest, Southeast. Runners threatening for the night. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. We'll have a Jock Doc on the way. Good stuff from Evan Bland, not only on Nebraska baseball, where they may turn from a pitching standpoint, but also the recruitment of Carter Nelson that continues to heat up. 489-1240, 489-1240. Can dial up or send an email, chris@hailvarsity.com. So a response from, as he now wants to be called, Common Sense Todd. and he got it. I prefer Common Sense Todd. He writes in his email, I'm going to start using proper pronunciation because you suck at reading.
That's true.
I don't. You want me to tell you what he sends?
I'm sorry, Schmidt. I just had to get a jab in there. I'm sorry.
No, I can read fine, but I get sick and tired of trying to read just lines upon lines upon lines upon lines that have no period at the end of them. It's one jumbled mess. It just blows me away. There's way too much parity for little old Nebraska to be great again. We can only hope to be a 500 team yearly.
Ooh,
well, Common Sense Todd, thanks for the response, and thanks for the punctuation.
Needs an AP style book stat.
I don't require much. Just spit your thoughts out and let me read them. I'm capable of doing it. Or I'll make Elijah or Connor read them. Fine. But they'll be read.
No, I probably couldn't do any better than you. I was just talking some trash on the air here.
As it is a Vent Wednesday, let's get Donette's comments up here. And just get the whole full Nelson here. I do not want to listen to sports on KFOR. Donette, don't know what to tell you. You've got it 9 to 10 in the morning. You got it 10 to 11 in the morning. You got it 4 to 6 weekdays. Thanks for your listenership. So, anonymous coaches. We'll wrap with 2 crossovers that Nebraska faces. And Nebraska's crossover schedule, not easy. You have Michigan in Lincoln. You're on a roadie up to Michigan State, tough place to play. And then Maryland comes to Lincoln. So 2 of the 3 are at home at least, if you're a Nebraska fan. Maryland, listen, a lot of the anonymous coaches wow at their athletic skill, their talent, their speed guys. They like the recruiting that Loxley's done. They got little Tua back at quarterback. And there's quite a bit of respect from the Big Ten about how dangerous Maryland is. The question for the Terps, can they put it together? Do you see Maryland as a team that could overtake Penn State as that third team, or put a run together where they may raise up to a team that's second in the Big Ten? I think they've got draft picks on both sides of the ball, but I think those draft picks are more in the back 7 and at wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. Not that their lines are bad, but they're not as physical as some of the other teams. I think that's always going to be Maryland's problem.
I look at the schedule of Maryland, and it sets up decently for them. It's backloaded. It's backloaded in the month of November. You're going to have to reel off a few wins in the month of November. But your first real test, your first conference game, is going to be late September at Michigan State. That's the first real test for how good this this Maryland team is going to be. You got Indiana the week after that, and then Ohio State. And then you got Illinois, Northwestern, and then the brutal November stretch, which is at home against Penn State, at Nebraska, at home against Michigan, and then at Rutgers. That's how Maryland's schedule shapes up for them. They're non-conference. Don't want to call it cupcake. You have a game against Virginia, which is probably going to be a test, but you go Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, and then Michigan State, which is incrementally getting better as the year goes on. You have chances to kind of settle into your season. This comes after an 8-5 season next year. 9 wins for Maryland. That would involve losses to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. A 9-win season for Rutgers, I think, is doable, and it would be a market improvement for what they have. I mean, they were 8-5 last year. What I say?
Yeah, Maryland.
You said
Maryland,
Rutgers.
You said Rutgers.
I keep on doing that.
We were going to drug. We went
to Minnesota. We went to Maryland. We went to Rutgers.
But I think 9 wins for them. I saw the look on Schmidt's face. I'm like, what did I say? Did I say something wrong?
All right.
Is 9 wins that crazy for Maryland? I mean,
Schmidt can't read. You can't decipher what school's Maryland. All right, what's my
East Coast schools? One likes crab cakes, the other like tank tops.
Yeah, but with Maryland, I'll get it right this time. I think we all like what Talia Tagovailoa is at quarterback. I think we like what they all have in their coaching staff. We like what they have on their roster. Their schedule sets up decently for them. The biggest knock against them is the fact that they're Maryland, and who expects anything from Maryland in football. But this is a good Maryland team. I'm not going to sit here and say they should be competing for a Big Ten East crown. I'm not going to say that they're going to be playing in the conference title game, but they're in the top half of the Big Ten this year, which is your top 7 teams. I think they're pretty comfortably in there. I'd put them in probably at 4 or 5 in terms of talent on their roster and what they returned from last season. 9 wins isn't out of the question for me with Maryland.
Guys, the thing that Maryland runs up against, as good as they are and as fast as they are, they just can't handle the trenches. And Iowa's pummeled them. Illinois is not a good matchup for them. If Nebraska gets back to being physical, that's not a good matchup for them. You know how physical the Kings of the East are. So I just don't see that being a shift. Loxley's niche is going and getting skill guys, getting cornerbacks, getting fast linebackers. And they had it going with Durkin, but he turned out to be a psycho. And Loxley's not bad, but I think they'd be content with 8-5. I think they're very dangerous. I think that's a very dangerous game for Nebraska.
Well, look at the teams on their schedule, though, that their hallmark is beating you with physicality. It's Michigan. It's Illinois. I mean, do you want to put? I'm not comfortable putting Nebraska in there just yet.
No,
I don't think I'm going to put Northwestern in there. That's what they were a couple of years ago. They were a very physical football team, but recently, not so much. Ohio State, they have physicality, but they're not. That's not their brand. Their brand is out physicaling you. There's not that many teams on Maryland's schedule that I think pose a real matchup nightmare in terms of they're going to beat you and they're going to beat you bad on the trenches. Maybe you can put Penn State in there, but again, Penn State's physical in the trenches, but that's not the hallmark of their football team. I think Maryland's schedule sets up pretty well for them, and as I laid out earlier, it's backloaded with some of those physical football teams. They're going to be coming later in the schedule whenever you've already had a chance to work your way in, build some confidence going into it. I think Maryland's dangerous this year.
Michigan State, as we wrap up the anonymous coaches, the other crossover, Nebraska heads to East Lansing. The word on Sparty, they're the ultimate 50-50 program, and their talent is very reliant in the portal. They also lost a lot in the portal this year. They're similar to Ole Miss with how portal heavy they are, which does that work for Mel Tucker to be 11-2 at its best, 10 wins, 9 wins in a good year, and then fall back to 5-7? Will that play in East Lansing? His contract's $9.5 million a year, so that's a monster deal and a buyout. And he's been good at the portal acquisitions. This is the year where they get stung for what they lost. I think he's got a tough football team. I think he has athletes. I think he'll be able to recruit well. What's his retention going to be like? Is it going to be worse than other Big Ten schools? And can he have a Northwestern type setup where you're either good or terrible in a given year? I think you want that consistency where you know what you are, and that's a 7-8 win football team, and peak it up to 11, and worst case you're still bowling. And I don't know. I think he's playing with fire right now with being so portal heavy,
especially in the Big Ten East.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think honestly any school, obviously outside of your college football playoff contenders, are playing with fire when they're that portal heavy as well. And you mentioned the Northwestern comparison too about the lack thereof of consistency. Well, that's kind of what we've seen from Michigan State so far. I think they're probably around a 7-1 football team this year just based on what they lost. But it's going to be, I mean, this is a huge year in East Lansing, right? And I got a couple of friends who go to East Lansing as well, and I talk to them about, football with them all the time, and they say that, they can feel the pressure up in East Lansing this year. So, and you add in the monster buyout that you mentioned, $9.5 million a year. I mean, is 7 wins, granted that gets you to the postseason, which you couldn't do last year. How much farther and how much more security does that give Mel Tucker, and how much more faith does that put the fans having in the football program too? So it's going to be a really interesting year for Michigan State. that's why I'm so intrigued with Nebraska's trip up there in November as well.
Mm-hmm.
If Nebraska can, put together a solid, however many games it is before that, I believe it's 6 or 7, maybe 8 games before that. So that could be a really interesting and, headliney game. Maybe not for all the marbles, but two programs who are trying to get back on track. So it's going to be a pressure-filled year for Mel Tucker. And playing with fire in the portal, I think you put Michigan State as a program that is indeed playing with fire. And I think you could put a lot of programs in the Big Ten, such as in that category, with the exception of maybe Michigan, Ohio State, and depending on the year, Penn State.
And with Michigan State, we talked about schedule with Maryland. Look at this stretch in their football schedule. At the end of October into November, they go home against Michigan, at Minnesota, home against Nebraska, at Ohio State. That's a rough 4-game stretch for Mel Tucker.
Man.
Especially for that to close your season, and you finish the year against Penn State on Friday night at Ford Field. Like, if you have a stinker to end the season, there's no promise that Mel Tucker is going to be around next season. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but look at that stretch. Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio State, and then you get one game against Indiana, and then you're back at home against Penn State at Ford Field. Like, 1-5 in that stretch, 2-4 in that stretch would probably be a good result, but it's still going to look terrible.
I think 11-2 still has some shelf life. It's not expired in the fridge yet. And I think the buyout, this is too soon to hand over that monster of a deal. But, I mean, you're following D'Antonio, who took them to heights, and he got off on the right foot where he's beat Michigan more times than not early on in his 3 years there. I mean, he's 2-1 against
What happens
them,
if they go 4-8? They got a tough schedule this year. They're non-conference.
Totally
It's against Washington. They have to play Washington week 3. That's brutal for them.
But they also could split that 4-game stretch. They could beat Nebraska. They could beat Minnesota at home. Mm-hmm. And how bad do you get killed against Ohio State? And how respectable is it against the college football playoff favorite in Michigan, which is your rival? Jock Doc's on the way. We'll get a steak and a beer bet before we shut her down. Wednesday edition, Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back into it. It's Hail Varsity Radio at Jock Doc Wednesday, Nebraska Orthopedic Center. Dr. Brandon Seifert with us. Dr. Brandon, how we doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you guys doing?
We're good. All of our head, shoulders, knees, and toes are doing okay, but the toe of one Aaron Judge has landed him on the 10-day IL, and this was kind of a little subtly a vicious bang job, wasn't it, at the base of the wall as he was trying to chase down a foul ball?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through and I did a little slow-mo on that video. It's pretty impressive when you watch it. First you watch it, normal speed and thinking not a big deal, and then he's just a huge fella, crap through that fence. But then as you start to slow that down and start to dial into that right foot, and you watch that kind of last second there, what it really looks like happened, as opposed to more, I thought maybe more of a hyper extension, it was more of actually just that direct impact. It's almost like he went and just kicked that kind of concrete strip that was down there at the bottom. Which again, you can start speculating on what type of injuries are going to be there just based upon that. You're going to have that direct blow impact part of it. There's obviously an opportunity there to even have maybe a turf toe type of injury, depending on what position that great toe was in when the injury happened. Fortunately, as you read through the medical reports, in fact, Dr. Ahmad, who's their team physician, made a comment about his fracture, which is good, surprisingly, based on looking at that video.
Yeah, no fracture, but they're waiting for the swelling to go down. They have to cut his cleats off of him because he's got giant piggies. Those are monster feet with someone that's 6'7". And let's just be honest in the room here. Baseball cleats are not the most protective of items to put on your feet. And then you factor that in with the bang job. But from a swelling standpoint, I mean, that's going to be a few days. But is this an ice and an elevation, a resting, almost like an ankle? Or give me a thought on treatment here, aside from staying off of it.
Yeah, Chris, great And so you start to speculate some on this. So these can go, kind of in two different directions here. So if he's lucky, this is going to be more of just kind of the contusion type kind of jam, that we call that first MTP joint, which is basically where that long bone in the middle of your foot called the metatarsal joins up with kind of that first part of your great toe. Best case scenario, there's just kind of jammed it, some bruising, a little bit of bleeding and swelling, and that should go down with obviously the kind of rest and ice, and that would be ideal for him, other than being just sore for maybe the next 3 to 6 weeks when he goes back and plays. On the flip side, you look at a trauma like that, and then you can start talking about some of those other things that are limiting and kind of frustrating, maybe even kind of career type issues down the road, such as turf toe type injury. And so, anatomically, as we think about a turf toe injury, so you think about your great toe, on the bottom part of that great toe, that main joint, we call it the MTP joint. What happens is that end of that great toe gets forced in that kind of hyperextension, hypersuflexion moment. You'll really stretch all those tissues on the bottom side of that first MTP joint. And then from there, you can develop, arthritis, damage to the cartilage, obviously that big kind of rip in that we call the plantar plate area. You can even fracture some of the little sesamoids, which are little bones that kind of hold ligaments in the area. So there's a lot of extensive damage that can occur there, and that kind of puts you in a whole other category. They're not saying that here, but that's what you would worry about with that kind of mechanism that he had, and that can be very limiting. And so it might be several weeks before it gets back, and it'll still be kind of quite achy and painful, and long term, if that is the case, then you worry about how well is he running around the outfield in the future.
Yeah, Dr. Brown, let's get into that really fast. From a biomechanical sense, how important is your big toe when playing sports? I know how important it is just for general balance in day-to-day life, but from an athlete's point of view, how important is that big toe?
Yeah, it's super important. You think about kind of that last kind of final push of explosiveness kind of comes off of that area, and it can be have a big impact in terms of how much that kind of final push is for you in terms of cutting, jumping, all those kind of things. This plays a big role into that kind of that first step that you have to take off and chase a ball. So all those things are really important. And so even though you look at that and you're like, really? A joint, that size can be that impactful, but it really is. It's kind of the keystone in that area, albeit it's not as important as, say, the midfoot, but it has definitely a very high role and importance when you look at kind of everything combined.
Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. We're talking Aaron Judge and his big toe as he injured it against the White Sox, 10-day IL for Judge. Let's talk in the batter's box, Dr. Brandon, and just what type of issue that could be. You've mentioned the lingering and the arthritic part of things, but could this affect his power or just more so his comfort when we get into the footwork, the stride, when he's trying to turn on either a breaking pitch, a fastball, whatever someone's throwing at him?
Mm-hmm. I think down the road, probably not a huge deal, from that perspective. I think there would potentially be less kind of irritation from that mechanism. Obviously, early on, you do generate that power as you're trying to pivot through and move those hips through to hit the ball. You're putting a lot of rotational and axial load force through that first MTP joint. So sure, I think that'll have an impact for him, at least initially here as he comes back. Again, hopefully this is going to be more on just the sprain side and not a high-grade kind of plantar plate or turf toe type injury.
So, Dr. Brendan, in your expert opinion, in the short term for the New York Yankees, should they be more worried about Aaron Judge's toe or about the quality of air in New York City right now?
That's a great question. I saw that study that came out today. That's pretty terrible.
I've seen the pictures that are coming out of New York City. It looks like some comic book scene. It's absolutely crazy looking.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Scary stuff, yeah, which is interesting when you think about a lot of people use mass transit there as opposed to some of our bigger cities, such as L.A., Phoenix, where there's tons and tons of cars on the road. So it's interesting that they have such an issue.
Yep, good old Canada. We
as
won't
always,
start an international incident with Canada. But
always a good plan to just blame Canada for the U.S.'s problems.
Why not? Kidding, of course, kidding. So with Aaron Judge, do you see this? Once that 10-day number hits, can he get back at it, or are they going to still play it a little bit by ear? Is this just a 10-day injury?
Yeah, I honestly think they'll probably play a little bit by ear. Again, watching that video, seeing that kind of mechanism that's there, the trauma that was there, and then, listening to their team physician, talk guardedly about how much swelling is there. I could see them, extending this a little further out. Obviously, you're looking at him kind of long-term, although he's had kind of a hot start here. You hate to hold him out too long with some of the numbers he's putting up, as that kind of limits him in some of those races. But I think they go a little longer on this. I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a 20 or 30-day stint.
Dr. Brandon Seifert with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center, a Jock Doc Wednesday. Aaron Judge and his toe issues on the 10-day IL. Dr. Brandon, always fun to get caught up. Thanks for the expertise today.
All right, fellas. Y'all take care.
Dr. Brandon Seifert with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center, Jock Doc Wednesday. Steak and a beer bet coming up as Elijah's Denver Nuggets are set to keep him from crying. Connor Clark, yeah, you got your Nuggets hat on. At least it's better than that tank top. Reminder to get buckled up. Use your seatbelt. It saves lives, prevents injuries only if properly worn. Buckle up. A message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. I'm being visited by Sitz, dear family friend. We had such a good old time at the Fiesta Bowl back when Nebraska went bowling. It was great. It was awesome. As he's taunting me with a hot dog. Okay, we'll wind down this second hour. Hail Varsity continues, presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
And Hard Talk, a little road show as runners threatening for Southeast JV baseball. Pitching change for Southwest as Ike takes the hill. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. Find us on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbel. And for Connor Clark at C_Clark_27. Game 3, the Nuggets, the Heat, -3.5. Denver favored. Man, that's a thin line. It might be a sucker bet, but I would jump all over any points for Jimmy Buckets and company at home, Elijah.
You're speaking my language, Schmitty.
So you're saying your guys bounce back tonight?
Oh, in a big way. In a big way.
Okay.
I've become more confident as the evening has progressed. I've been talking with Connor about this, how my stress levels have been rising. In addition, my confidence in what the Nuggets can do has been rising. They had their worst game of the postseason on Sunday night. Like, there's only one way to go. It's up. I know, and I don't want to discount what Spoelstra does. He's going to make more adjustments tonight. I think the Nuggets, though, after seeing what happened last game, are going to have the better adjustments to be made tonight. The one X factor to me is that Miami crowd. What are they like in a finals game? Is that going to present some adversity for the Nuggets? I think this Nuggets lineup is just too good for Jokic to be the only guy who's scoring back-to-back games. I think somebody else is going to step up, and I think the defense will just have to do enough at that point. Tonight might be more of a shootout, in my opinion. And I think this series may continue to be a shootout, but I think the Nuggets have more offensive firepower. The Heat are going to do what they do. They're going to shoot 40+% from three. They're going to generate good looks, but the Nuggets are going to do the same thing. I see a shootout tonight, and I see a 5 to 6 point Nuggets victory.
Okay. I mean, you look at Jokic, 16 to 28, Murray, 7 to 15, missed that 3. I like where your head's at with Denver responding like champions after a bad ball game, and more so an effort issue and not being able to slam the door. But Miami, Connor, has thrived on just playing that underdog, and they're anything but when you got a guy that can win it for you in Jimmy.
Well, that's exactly right, because they're not supposed to be here. They have nothing to lose. I mean, I guess they have a championship to lose now, but before that, they're the underdog. They're not supposed to be in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're not supposed to have a 3-0 lead on the Boston Celtics. They're not supposed to be in this series right now. They weren't supposed to win Game 2 of this series, right? And they handed Denver their first home playoff loss of this playoffs. So I'm not saying that the Heat are going to come out here and beat Denver in this series. It's not what I'm saying at all. But I would not be surprised if they do win tonight, because they take the momentum from that Game 2 win. They bring it back to Miami, and all of a sudden you have a home crowd, and all of a sudden your role players are playing a lot better than they were in game one. Now, Denver, obviously they will bounce back in a big way, as Elijah said as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if Miami ends up taking a 2-1 lead. Either way, and Elijah and I talked about this earlier, I think it'll be even going back to Denver for game 5.
I agree with that. I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. Maybe not in terms of skill set on the floor. I think the Nuggets have some more talent. I think Spoelstra's the better head coach. I agree with Connor. I think this series is 2-2 headed back to Denver.
Taking a beer. We got to hurry. Are you taking the points or are you taking the Heat to cover?
Nuggets cover 3 all day.
Okay.
I'll take the Heat. I'll spice it up.
I'll take the Heat. T-bone, 20-pounder.
I'll take 2 steaks.
Boom.
2 steaks. One from Connor, one from Schmidt, 2 beers, whatever.
All right, done. Elijah going caveman today. I like it. Back tomorrow at 4 on Hail Varsity. Find the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play.